Hello and welcome back to this channel. Today's theme is the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Balkan's Son, regular edition, recently published in March, at the end of March. And this is the first standalone edition after 70 years of its first publication. And here is, along with the Battle of Maldon, which inspired Tolkien to write this dramatic text. And here is, I guess, the deluxe edition of this book. And it is from Kenny's bookshop from Ireland. And I may say that this is quite a decent substitute for Book Depository because shipping costs are merely €1 for Serbia. And I think that maybe from some countries is shipping free. But first unbox and then speak.
At Kenny's.
Well, this is a surprise. I didn't expect this CD to find it within Deluxe edition because it was announced that the CD will be published as well as the regular edition at the end of March. And then I was waiting for Book Depository to send it eventually, and it never happened, and they refunded my amount, saying that the audiobook will be published merely in digital version. And then I wrote to HarperCollins, and they confirmed that they will not sell it as a CD, and I was devastated. And now this is quite a thrill, because this recording is previously released on cassette tape in 1992 to commemorate the 100th birthday of J.R. Tolkien, and as well anniversary of the Battle of Maldon. And that was an official edition because that cassette was never published, and you couldn't buy it in CD or vinyl record shops. And all these years we were waiting for these recordings to be officially published for all the Tolkien fans that would like to have it in their collections of audiobooks. So this is quite a surprise. And now just a brief comparison between these two editions. The regular one comes with the dust jacket, as we used to, and this is some brownish color of the cover. And the quality of the paper is not of the first class, and as well there are no any stitches here, just glue and this cloth that keeps the pages. Okay, this one is somewhat of the orange hue, I would say. Maybe I do not discern the colors properly, with these graphics which are included all around before the chapters in the regular edition. Okay. Oh, I don't know why they printed the deluxe edition on the same on the paper of the same quality as the regular edition. This is quite odd, and this is for the first time that some deluxe edition, HarperCollins deluxe editions are all but deluxe editions, except those two of orange Silmarillion and the blue Unfinished Tales. This is the first time that I know, and I have all those deluxe editions in my book collection, that the book was printed on such bad quality paper. Okay, the ribbon is here, but considering all these cons, I would say this ribbon is merely an oxymoron. And the Homecoming was published for the first time within one book in this Tolkien reader, along with Tree and Leaf and Adventures of Tom Bombadil and Farmer Giles of Ham. And that was, I think, 1966. Yes, 1966. And this is the second time the Homecoming was published within this deluxe edition of Poems and Stories, illustrated by Pauline Baynes, along with the essay on fairy stories, The Adventure of Tom Bombadil, Leaf by Nigel, Farmer Giles of Ham, and Smith of Wootton Major. And it's beautifully illustrated by Pauline Baynes. I think there are two or three illustrations. The first one, the second, and that would be all. Two illustrations. Now, the first two parts of the book, the introduction, the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Bertham's son, and the Battle of Maldon, and then part 3 is dedicated to Tolkien's prolix essay, which previously wasn't published as a part of one of his editions, and it is about the tradition of versification in Old English, with special references to the Battle of Maldon and its alliteration. And here Tolkien discussed about, as it is said in title, about the versification in Old English, especially in Beowulf, as we know that he also translated Beowulf from Old English. And then he referred to the Battle of Maldon and explained why he decided to translate that part of poem in prose manner rather than in alliterative verse. And then there are appendices as well, and this one is quite interesting as well. Old English prosody, which is appendix to previous essay about versification, or if you wish, a receipt for the craft of alliterative verse, one which no doubt served Tolkien in the composition of new works like the Homecoming. And then there is the early version of the text, which is here enclosed as an early draft of Tolkien's verse drama, and at length some developments in the draft of the Homecoming. And the version of this audiobook is previously published in 1992 and was read partially by Christopher Tolkien, and the main part of this alliterative dramatic dialogue was read by Tolkien himself, all along with the side effects which he produced by himself in his studio by removing the parts of the furniture. And the text was published for the first time in 1953 in Essays and Studies by the English Association, and we may see here in content that the Tolkien's text is the first in this collection. And the inspiration for this dramatic dialogue Tolkien found in an extant fragment of Old English verse, the Battle of Maldon. And in one of his letters, published in the Letters of J.R. Tolkien from June 1955, regarding this text, he declared this passage: "I write alliterative verse with pleasure, though I have published little beyond the fragments in The Lord of the Rings, except the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, in Essays and Studies of the English Association, recently twice broadcast by the BBC, a dramatic dialogue on the nature of the heroic and the chivalrous, I still hope to finish a long poem, The Fall of Arthur, in the same measure. I already mentioned that that Tolkien recorded all by himself the dialogue, which was broadcast on the BBC with all those effects. And I'm afraid that due to the copyright, I cannot publish it in this video, because it should be taken down by the YouTube Society. So it's up to you to find it on some audiobook platform, and then to hear how does it sound. And the scientific public didn't employ, I dare say, this part of Tolkien's work, except this one article that I found, and it was published by Mythopoeic Society in 202, and the author is J.K. Stompkins, and the title is The Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Berthelm's Son, Tolkien as a Modern Anglo-Saxon. And there is an passage which I chose, where the Tompkins cited the Shapiro from his essay, and it says, quote, Tolkien's understanding and indeed mastery of the form of all English poetry are clear when one examines the technical aspects of this poem. Michael Shapiro notes that the alliterative tradition is more fully realized in Tolkien's work than perhaps in any other poet of the 20th century. Enough. End of the quote. And the aforementioned Battle of Maldon is actually the fragment of almost 320 verses, probably written down in 11th century. And the Battle of Maldon was fought in August 1991 in the vicinity of Maldon in Essex, beside the river Blackwater, actually besides the estuary of the river of Blackwater, and the river has two major tributaries, the River Bray and the River Chelmer. And the battle took place during the reign of Ethelred, and the Earl Beorhtnoth and his thanes led the English against the Viking invasion. And here is the plain on that estuary where actually the battle took place. And on one side, on this green part, were the Anglo-Saxons, and on the opposite part, mostly under the water, stood the Vikings. And stanzas from the poem which Tolkien translated in prose, and which is now part of this edition, speaks that there, because of the water, neither host could get at the other. There after the ebb came the flowing tide, the streaming waters locked together. They were impatient for the time when they might meet spear with spear. They then stood there on either side of the river Panther, in their armies, the ranks of Essex and the pirate horde, and neither side could damage the other, save for such as got his death by flying arrow. The tide went out. And then it continues, the seamen stood ready, many pirates eager for battle. Then the protector warriors ordered a soldier bold in battle to hold the bridge, and he shot with his casting spear the first man who there, more daring than the others, set foot upon the bridge. When then they perceived this, and saw clearly that they had there come upon no gentle guardians of the bridge, those vile invaders made a plausible appeal by Beorhtnoth's chivalry, and asked they might have opportunity for coming up on his bank and leading their troops over the ford. Then the Earl of his over-confident chivalry conceded too much land to that hateful people. Then did he, Berthelm's son, shout over the fatal water, and men hearkened to him. Now we had made room for you. Come ye men, quickly to us and to battle. God alone knows who may be master of the stricken field. Then waded those murderous wolves, all the pirate host, heedless of the water, west over Panta, and over the clear water the men of the invading fleet bore their linden shields. There to meet his foes stood ready Beorhtnoth with his men. He ordered them to make that phalanx with their shields, and bade his host stand firm against the enemy. Now was fighting near at hand, glory in battle. The time was come when those who fate it was to die should there fall slain. There was the battle cry upraised, the ravens went to and fro, and the eagle eager for carrion. Clamour was upon the earth. Then they left fly from their hands spears file-hardened, and javelins group sharp. Bows were busy, shields received point. Bitter was that onslaught. Men fell on either side, and warriors lay dead, and so on. The dramatic dialogue, the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Beorhton's son, has two dramatis personae, Tidwald, colloquially Tidde, which is an old farmer, and Thorthelm, colloquially Totta, a youth, a son of a minstrel. And it is comprised of three segments: Beorhtnoth's death, the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Beorhton's son, and the overmod, the pride, which took the Lord Beorhtnoth to allow the Vikings to cross over the bridge, and then to provoke the turmoil, and the battle ended in Anglo-Saxon defeat. And here are some parts which I choose to read here, so that will give you some impressions and maybe inspire somebody to read it, actually. Those illustrations are from that book that I showed, Poems and Stories, and Pauline Baines made it especially for that edition. Tidde and Tota are wandering on the battlefield, seeking for their master, for Beorhtnoth. And Thorthelm speaks, "An ill-boding, old omens, but I'm not afraid, not of fancied fears. A fool call me, but more man than I find the murk gruesome among the dead and shrouded. It's like the dim shadow of heat in hell, in the hopeless kingdom when search is vain. We might seek forever, and yet miss the master in this murk, Tidde. O Lord beloved, where do you lie tonight? Your head is so hoar upon the heart pillow, and your limbs lying in long slumber." And then they finally perceived the master, and Tidwald said, "Tota, it's the master at last." And then he replied, "His head was higher than the helm of kings with heathen crowns, his heart keener and his soul clear than swords of heroes polished and proven. Than plated gold his worth was greater. From the world has passed a prince peerless in peace and war, just in judgment, generous-handed as the golden lords of long ago. He has gone to God glory-seeking, Beorhtnoth beloved." And then they found his sword. "I found it, Tidde. Here's his sword lying. I could swear to it by the golden hilts." "I'm glad to hear it. How it was missed is a marvel. Oh, he's marred cruelly. Few tokens else shall we find of him. They've left us little of the Lord we knew. Ah, war and wars, the foolish heathens have hewn off his head. What a murder it is, this bloody fighting." Then they took the body of Beorhtnoth, along with his severed head, and put it in a cart, and then they conveyed it to Ely Cathedral to be buried. And this part particularly is for me the strongest and the most beautiful part of the entire dialogue, and it's somehow a prophetic, I may say. And now I should read it. There candles in the dark and cold voices. I hear mass chanted for master soul in Ely Isle. Thus ages pass, and man after man, mourning voices of women weeping. So the world passes, day follows day, and the dust gathers. His tomb crumbles, as time knows it, and his kith and kindred out of can dwindle. So men flicker, and in the murk go out. The world withers and the wind rises. The candles are quenched. Cold falls the night. Extraordinary. And now I should return for a second on that essay that I mentioned on the beginning, and to read this passage which Tompkins wrote in that manuscript. And it says, controversy has always dogged Tolkien's work despite his popularity. Critics remain sharply divided as to the worth of works such as The Hobbit and to Tolkien's place in the English canon. Much of these debates stems from a misunderstanding of Tolkien's style and his approach to writing. Many critics, seeing him merely as a fantasist, are content to dismiss his works as escapism. Nothing could be further from the truth. Instead of focusing on the realism of modern fiction, Tolkien owes much of his sense and style to the Anglo-Saxon poets, whom he knew and loved so well. If we cease to think of Tolkien as a modern writer and begin to see him as a modern Anglo-Saxon, we come much nearer to a proper understanding of his work. The words. Amen. And then the mentioned passage at the end in the Ely Cathedral, which I marked as my favorite part. The author of the essay says, "This, the awareness of the passage of time, the ever-presence of death, and the fleeting nature of all earthly things, is the very essence of the warrior's consolation found in the great poems like Beowulf. This awareness creates some of the most poignant passages in poem like The Wanderer, as it does for the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Balkan's son, capturing the brooding pensivities of the Anglo-Saxon scope." It continues, "Though Tolkien weaves the heroic theme masterfully into the poem, he nonetheless has a slightly different, one might say more democratic, focus than his Anglo-Saxon predecessors. As has been noted before, the main characters are commoners, not the noble warriors of the most of English poetry. This is important in relation to the poem mood, for while Tida and Tota are not Beorhtnoth's thanes, they are nonetheless affected by his death. There is something in their sorrow for his death that is like of the mourners at Beowulf's funeral, the dread of the future now that there is no law to protect them," and so on. And at length, this poem is in fact not some strange atavism of Tolkien's thought. It is rather key to his thought. If we may understand the important points of the Homecoming of Beorhtnoth, Balkan's son, especially the important bridges or connections to the Old English style and thought, then we may indeed understand much of Tolkien's work as a whole. And these passages are quite an explanation of why Tolkien's work, except the Lord of the Rings, is underestimated, I would say, especially his translations or his versions of the poems that he loved, such as The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun, then Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, then The Fall of Arthur, then Beowulf, the story of Kullervo, and the lay of Othro and Itrun, which is inspired by Welsh mythology. So this is a sort of my petite appeal to Tolkien fans to take heed on such editions of Tolkien translations and the poems and stories that he fancied and marveled and was inspired by to write all of his well-known writings, such as Silmarillion and The Lord of the Rings, of course, and Hobbit. And for all who didn't read already, to give a chance to this editions, because I think that a lot of lore is accumulated within these books, and they will open for you myriad of new worlds which inspired Tolkien to write all of those stories that you like and that you often read and come back to. So if you have any questions, you may ask me in commentaries, or you may find me on my Instagram profile, Barbatus Calvus. And that would be all for this video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.